Hi, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dorothy Mae Mercer. I'm coming to you for Julia Wood Productions. We have tonight a very interesting guest. You're going to be fascinated at his story. He has some things to tell you about his parents that I think you'll like to hear. His name is David Groen, and he's ready to go. Good afternoon, David. How are you?
Hi, Dorothy Mae. Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well.
Yeah.
Tell us about your...
Thank you for having me here today.
Okay. You have an interesting...
Okay, I'm here to talk about the... Right, thank you. I'm here to talk about the book that I wrote in my parents' life, primarily surrounding that took place between 1940 and 1945 in Nazi-occupied Holland. The name of the book is Judas. The person on the cover, as you can see, this lovely young woman on the cover, was my mother in 1941 when she was 19 years old. And my parents both were born and raised in Holland. My mother was born and raised in Amsterdam. My father was born in Rotterdam and moved to Amsterdam at the age of 6. And this story basically takes place from the time that the Nazis came into Holland and occupied the country. The story, and the basis of the title of the story, has to do with the fact that in Holland in 1940, there's a large Jewish population. There was 10% of the population was Jewish. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay. A lot of the population was Jewish. 10% of the population in Amsterdam was Jewish population. Anybody basically at that time who had a dark complexion and dark hair was considered to be Jewish. It was obvious that they were Jewish. So for my mother, who had this complexion and this dark look, for anybody in Holland, she had the typical face of a Jew. The other part is that there's an incident that takes place. We'll read from it later from the book, where the Nazi soldiers saw my mother from afar, and she could identify the fact that they were saying that that woman has a face of a Jew. They identified her from afar in a situation that obviously frightened my mother very much. One of the many situations that was very frightening for both my parents. The book is, first of all, let me start off by saying the book is available on Amazon.com. It's available on BarnesandNobles.com. It's published by Author House Publishing. It's also available on their website. And I have put together a website to not only promote the book, but to discuss issues relevant to the book and relevant to the modern day world. Not just for the Jewish people, but for decent people all over the world who want to fight against persecution, against people who want to do any type of discrimination, anything that is really that goes back to this time and the relevance of this time. The name of the website that I have is Holland's Heroes, and it's hollandsheroes.com. HOLLANDSHEROES.com. On that website, it also gives a link on how to purchase the book, and it really discusses the book in detail and goes over much of the story and much of how things relate to today's world. So that's my personal introduction to the story. Now, I don't know if you want me to I can obviously go through. I can tell you a little bit about the background. I can tell you a little bit about the history. I can tell you a little bit about some of the events. Do you have any questions you want to ask me, or should I just continue for now?
I think our viewers would be interested in some of the story. What happened?
Okay, absolutely. The background in Holland was, especially Amsterdam, was a very interesting scenario, very interesting dynamic for the Jewish people. Like I said, 10% of the Jewish population in Amsterdam, 10% of the population in Amsterdam was Jewish. Of that population, the majority of the population really came from the Eastern European descent and had moved over towards Holland, such as Czechoslovakia, where my father's family originally came back from Germany, even from Poland. They basically migrated eventually over to Holland. But there was a very significant part of the Jewish population in Amsterdam, which was from Spanish-Portuguese descent, from when the Jews in Spain were expelled in 1492, and then going through Portugal, they ended up in Holland, in Amsterdam, which was a safe haven for them. My mother's maiden name is Rodriguez Lopez, and both the Rodriguez and the Lopez have an S at the end, which means it's the Portuguese spelling of the names. And in Holland, anybody who had that kind of name is Jewish. I live in New York. Somebody's name is Rodriguez Lopez. First thing that comes to people's mind is not that they're Jewish. Okay? In Amsterdam, right. In Amsterdam in 1940, if the name was Rodriguez Lopez, that person was Jewish. So the other thing was, it was a very interesting dynamic. Now, my father's family was an Orthodox family. My mother's family was not an Orthodox family. So the chances of them actually meeting and actually ending up as a couple under normal circumstances was very small. However, as we all know, circumstances were not normal. The Germans invaded Holland in May of 1940. It took less than 5 days to completely capture the country, and immediately things changed for the Jews. Obviously, I don't know.
So the Nazis...
I don't know how much... Sorry?
So the Nazis set out to eliminate all the Jews from Holland.
Basically, absolutely, as they did from other parts of Europe, all over Europe, which is why, obviously, as people know, 6 million Jews were killed. In Holland, they took a somewhat different approach. First of all, Holland was very interesting. Holland had, from a numbers standpoint, not nearly as many Jews as a country like Russia or Poland or Hungary. Holland had 140,000 Jews prior to World War II. Holland was a very organized country. Holland had people basically register as who they were and what religion they were, and they had very good documentation of it. The intentions of the Dutch prior to it was disorganized, but that made it a lot easier for the Nazi killing machine to identify who they wanted to go after. Right. So when they came in, that combined with the fact that the physical appearance of the Jews in Holland made it very easy to identify who was Jewish and who wasn't Jewish very often. Unfortunately, it led to a very too easy for them to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. By the time the war was over, there were not many more than 30,000 Jews left in Holland. From a perspective, 75% of Dutch Jewry was murdered. Okay. Now, my father, who's on the back of the book, who after the war became a rabbi, this is a picture of him in 1945 as a Dutch Marine. Okay.
Oh, so he was...
My father did not... He basically was somebody who, because of his physical appearance, did not have to function during wartime the same way my mother did. A lot of this story, and one of the reasons why I came up with the title Jew Face, is a lot of this story revolves around the fact that the physical appearances of the main people involved, meaning my parents, artists and support Groen, a lot of the physical appearance had a large impact on the story. Now, the courage and the bravery, the strength, the remarkable stories that took place, that was the character of the people involved, and there I'll get into that a little bit more. But the dynamic that starts everything off is the fact my mother, outside of Holland, without immediately being identified as somebody who was Jewish. My father, on the other hand, could look around and could walk around the country and basically appear to be just any other Dutchman. Now, any other Dutchman in Holland at that time still had a choice to make. Any other Dutchman who was roaming around the country freely had to either find some work to do that was somewhat neutral to stay out of trouble, or it would be involved of the resistance if they were not going to be somebody who completely stayed hidden away or actually collaborated. Holland did not have a lot of collaborators, but it was still not a piece of cake for somebody who was a Dutchman without a fixed home and a fixed job, which was what my father basically turned out to be in that case. But the situation took place that obviously the neighborhoods were totally devastated. The Nazis came in, they cleared out the neighborhoods, they shipped them away to be murdered primarily either in Auschwitz or Sobibor death camps. My mother, during this time, losing most of her family and friends, was working as a nurse in a Dutch hospital. And my father, who had already caught on to what was going on, he was very pragmatic in that sense. He sensed, he understood what was happening a lot quicker than a lot of people wish to admit to themselves, would frequent that hospital. And he would go to that hospital for some diversion, and he would play table tennis, ping pong. And in the course of that, he saw a very attractive nurse, my mother. And that's how they met, and that's how, in some ways, the story starts. The Germans were very methodical in how they did things. As much as they were very clear about their intentions, and as much as they were very unapologetic about their desire to wipe the Jewish people from the face of the earth, they didn't do it in one quick felt swoop. What they did was they would do one raid here, one raid there, another raid here, another raid there. And little by little, they would empty out the neighborhoods, empty out the institutions, empty out the hospitals. So my mother, as a nurse, would witness quite a few raids. During one raid, the Nazi administrator, the head Nazi administrator in Amsterdam, Ferdinand Alster, Funten was his name, was standing there. And my mother, who, even to this day, she's not she's got a strong character woman, but she's not the kind of person who's going to start yelling at somebody very quickly. But this was not obviously a normal situation. She couldn't help herself anymore, and she shouted at him. She said, "Why are you doing this?" And his answer was, "You looked at the Rabbiner fragen," which means you should ask the rabbis. Go ask rabbis. That was his response. Because they were basically clearing out the hospital, taking sick patients, taking anybody they could, and they were basically sending them away to their death. The prologue of the book takes place at what was probably the worst raid that took place in the hospital. And it's a very, very telling story of the relationship that developed between my parents. My mother was on the third floor as a nurse, in the nurse's quarters. The hospital was being cleared out, and my father found her on the third floor. My mother had really, at this point, her will had been drained from everything that she had seen. She turned to my father and she said, "I'm just going to go with them. I'm going to take care of the sick people. Whatever happens to me, happens to me. I'm just going to let them take me too, and at least the people who are sick will have somebody who can actually help them out." My father said to her, "If that's the case, I'm going to throw you out the window right now because they're going to kill you anyway. At least I'm going to kill you quickly."
Oh.
And my mother, knowing that the point that my father was making was that he didn't want her to die, and he certainly didn't want her to die with torture and rape and the worst possible imaginable situations, she chose to follow my father. And from this point on, they were apart during the war, where my father to find himself go to different places, but this was the beginning of their travels together. Any questions so far that you have for me?
Oh, it's an absolutely chilling story. of course, we all know a lot about what happened to the Jews during World War II, but your story is personal. You know, it brings it home that, to an actual person and an actual story. I think that people are going to want to read your book. It's an important documentation of what happened for the future reference and for historians to study. You don't want to give away the ending, but you've been talking for 31 minutes already. It doesn't seem possible, does it? So I don't know how long you want it to be. You may want to kind of figure out a way to wind it up here.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, here's what I want to get across to people. Why this book? What makes this book different than other books, and why is this book special? The fact that I am sitting here talking to you today, talking about my father who passed away 5 years ago at 87, my mother who is 90 years old today, doing very well and very self-sufficient and strong and able-bodied and healthy. The fact of the matter is that with all the terror that took place, with all the devastation that took place to the Dutch community, this particular story has a happy ending. The fact that the fact that they lost so many friends and family, the fact that 75% of the Dutch community was destroyed, murdered by the Nazis, obviously speaks out throughout Europe, and just what the Germans were responsible for during that time. The Nazi war machine was responsible for the deaths of so many tens of millions, hundreds, so many people throughout the world, throughout Europe, who were killed because of that. But the story, this particular story itself, my parents' story, has a happy ending. I mean, in reality, they lived, once the war was over, they were able to live a normal life, had 5 children, 12 grandchildren, 8 great-grandchildren to today. And it really turned out well. I will say also something else. People like the story of good against evil. And I make this story against evil. If you are looking for a character analysis, an in-depth character analysis of the good people in this book, you're not going to find it. What I mean by that is, I don't delve into the flaws of the good people into this book. The flaws of the good people in this book are irrelevant. The courage, the bravery, the heroics of my parents, people who helped save them, who worked with them, who worked in the resistance, people like Lubertus and Geeske, who were the best that the world had to offer in terms of how they helped my mother, hid my mother for almost a year and a half in the countryside of in the countryside of Holland. These are amazing people. So as far as the flaws of the people are concerned in this book, not relevant. What's relevant is that there was a very basic good and there was a very basic evil. And I show that instinctively, and I show how in the end of this book it did prevail, with a very high cost, but it did prevail.
Well, thank you very much, David. I look forward to reading your book myself. In general, I try to avoid stories about World War II and what happened to the Jews because I know what happened. I lived through it myself, and I just can't bear the sadness of it. So the fact that your book has a happy ending would make it more appealing to me because I wouldn't be living in terror all the time thinking, oh, they're going to die, you know, to see that
right. Exactly.
So thank you very much.
One more I just want to say, and if it's okay, Dorothy, I just want to say one more time, the name of the book is Jew Face. It's a story of love.
So it's really a love story. A lot of us like those love stories, David.
Story of love and heroism and Nazi